We turn now to a story out of Austin, Texas, that's shocked social justice activists nationwide.
Some people sometimes think that some of what I've done to bring attention to issues isn't the best thing to do, But I like the trip to Venezuela, working with the FBI, those kind of things. People sometimes, I guess, are controversial.
The film's called Rebel Evolution, and it's about a hardcore leftist, anarchist activist that made a 180-degree turn and ended up being an FBI informant against the left. It's sort of the primary story.
We're doing about 20 minutes, correct?
I'm going to get as much as I can out of you.
There's not that much in there. I mean, what can I say?
That is absolutely
Pick the brain.
True. Okay.
They started to become a big realization for me that there were just things wrong.
That awakened me to some stuff, though. What was going on behind the scenes. Bill Kunstler was there, the stuff that was going on. I just was not the movement, the idealistic movement that I thought that we were about.
It's funny, like, everything is topsy-turvy, the world's turned upside down for me, because this is the complete opposite of what I was taught as a child.
When I was playing in groups, I had to ask the questions, It's, I'm thinking I'm liberal, I'm supposed to be liberal, and playing with these musicians who are supposed to be very tolerant and open-minded and all accepting.
The sense of kind of sticking me on a board and saying, the guy from the 60s, the guy who did these things.
I'm not a radical then, am I? Maybe it's sad to realize that.
I actually really got into political activism on this back patio for medicinal marijuana issues, That was my first action. It was a banner hang, climbed the moon tower. Statute of limitations is over on that, so I can say that. I was raised in the church when I was younger. My parents, at some point, I guess they began to not get along and they quit going to church at that time. And ultimately they divorced when I was 12. Well, I didn't handle that too well. I kind of felt like the whole world was something different than I thought it was supposed to be. And I got really angry and I left home. I started running away a lot.
He was very much a seeker and really wondered about questions of the world, and we talked a lot. He had a lot of kind of naive questions, and but he's very philosophical.
Ultimately, I decided to straighten up a little bit. Even though I was probably still pretty rowdy, I wasn't as bad as I was.
It was when he was around 20 years old, 20 or 21. He was unhappy in Houston. And I said, hey, why don't you come down to Austin?
I moved to Austin, Texas, when I was 19 or 20 from Houston. And I got involved in I guess I became politicized. And so we made a big 40-foot-long banner and climbed the moon tower and hung it and did a press release. It was the first time I'd ever done that. And we sent it out, and then the media actually read our press release verbatim. It said, local activists risk their lives to get the message out, and I thought that was great. Had my first success in affecting the media and how the media presents something. I just felt immediately that this empowerment that I could, if there was something I didn't like or didn't think was right, that I could talk to other people, get them to if they agreed with me, and then come up with creative ways to bring attention to an issue. I was staying with someone, a woman, and her friends came to town. And they were pretty intense in radical politics, pretty well, I guess, well-known activists. And a man had just gotten out of prison, whom at the time I believed was in prison unjustly for a number of decades. He was one of the most interesting people I'd ever met. His name was Robert King Wilkerson. He told me, he said, Brandon, if you challenge power, power is going to treat you the same way no matter what you do. And he said, Brandon, you can choose to throw a pebble in the pond and make some ripples, and that's really good, or you can throw a rock in the pond. And the relationship that he and I developed after that, it's safe to say that I got into, my views became a lot more radical. My approach to activism became a lot more confrontational. And I started reading a lot about the Black Panther Party.
He was reading a lot of really radical stuff.
I read everything I could read, and I talked to everyone I could talk to, and I went to everything I could go to, to learn about them and that attitude.
He was starting to hang out with people like Malik Rahim in New Orleans, and that whole crowd, you might say.
Bought a very strong narrative. It's something I think is instilled in us from Star Wars, which is that there's an evil empire and then there's the good guys fighting the evil empire.
I remember one night, he said, just a thought experiment. He said, I want you to repeat these words. And he said, leave those people alone. They're innocent. And I kind of smiled. He said, no, really repeat the words. Repeat what I just said. And so I said, okay, leave those people alone. They're innocent. He said, now, he reached behind the door and he pulled out this great big shotgun. He said, it's not loaded. He said, but he put it in my lap. He said, now hold that weapon. And he said, now say, leave those people alone. They're innocent. He said, now doesn't that feel a lot different? Leading up to Katrina, he would go down there and he would do work there, and he had friends in New Orleans. When the flood happened, of course, his friend King was stranded, and you've heard, and he can tell you the whole story of his wading into the floodwaters to rescue his friend.
And then when I went there, it was so confusing because you had men with guns, and you had some who were gang members and being horrible, You had some who were like white guys with guns, and it would be honest and accurate to say they were patriots who were defending their property and their community. That's true. But because of the socioeconomic situation in New Orleans, they were identifying friend or foe based on skin color, because oftentimes that's how that's identified, who has and who doesn't. So I've always felt a big desire in my heart to help people. And I've always felt very angry when I see somebody picking on somebody who's weaker than they are. That's always bothered me. And the people who didn't, and their little kids were starving, they wanted water and food. And if you had water and food, they wanted your water and food, because it turned into that there. You realize at some point, you're like, okay, this is a complete breakdown of our society. It's an industrial collapse. And the only way that I'm going to have any rights or anyone's going to hear what I have to say or let me keep my water is if I'm armed too.
Then he was involved with the Common Ground Collective, because that sort of came out of that whole circle of those old former Black Panthers, or and a lot of the political radicals said, okay, here's our chance to really throw down. The system has failed. There's just chaos and need, and anyone that goes down there can probably help out and help protect people.
And so I said, well, we have to figure something out. So I said, well, we're going to write a letter, and we're going to tell people who we are and what we want to do, and that we just don't have all the answers, but if we just call us and let's put our head together and let's help address the issues that are going on in their community. And the next thing you know, we had 11,000 flyers up in that area on the doors.
11,000 flyers with your cell phone number.
My phone number on it. And there was reasons for that, but it was just important that someone actually answered the call, that there was someone responsible who would answer the call. And people started calling. At the time I was mad, it cemented every anti-government view or anti-American view I had at the time. I was so mad and angry. And I'm sure if you were someone who had, from whatever perspective you were looking at it from, it could have cemented your views. It's so drastic. It was such a shock, Dead bodies floating suck, There's no way around it. They suck, It just sucks. It messes with you, and it just sucks. I remember an entire nation watching these images on TV, right, of these impoverished, neglected people, wading through water, standing on rooftops for a week, sometimes 10 days. I would get really mad when, like right afterwards, when I finally got my ass and my boat out of the water, and I got in a truck and I drove 150 miles away, and there were folks in a Taco Bell eating like nothing had happened, and there was water, and you could just spill water. We had just went through days of having to measure how much water we could have every day, and then worried someone would kill us or hurt us for our water. And 150 miles away, everything was cool. And I remember I was pretty resentful about that. I felt resentful that people weren't more concerned. Like there was no government there. There was very little government, very little law enforcement representation. There was very little government, but we were there and we met a lot of the needs. And so we basically had this like parallel government. That's what we thought. We thought we had a resistance movement or something, a revolutionary movement or something. And so all these groups around the world sent people to meet us. Some of them not so savory, it turns out. You know, relief organizations, relief groups, humanitarian groups. You know, but they were resistance groups, or they were fighting to overthrow the dominant order, which is the U.S. system. Hugo Chavez invited us to Venezuela. He wanted to embarrass the U.S. government. And at the time, there was a lot of commotion going on, but I actually went. I went there.
Went to Venezuela, and then he realized that the situation was very complex.
When I went to Venezuela and I thought about the Kennedy Foundation, Joe Kennedy taking all that oil and giving it to the poor because America doesn't care about its poor people or whatever that he does. When I went to Venezuela, when I stepped off the government-sponsored tour of the barrios, you know, I found people that were poorer than any American citizen I've ever seen in my life, and I was in the worst of it. But then here's the media saying that there's all these poor people being helped in Venezuela when he nationalized the oil industry, but that's not the truth. There's some being helped, the ones on the government-sponsored tour. So it was very eye-opening, even though I'm kind of glossing over a lot of stuff. It was very eye-opening. I was there a month, you know, and they didn't want to let me leave. I could tell you a whole bunch of stuff, and I had bodyguards who really weren't my bodyguards. You know, it was really scary. Because of my history and because of the connections I had, they were very convinced I was the real deal as a revolutionary, and which I was at the time. You know, I thought I was, at least.
There were many, many layers of intrigue, and you know, who's became, you know, who's trying to discredit whom, who's trying to finance a war against whom.
At the point that Venezuelan officials, or folks from PDVSA, began to try to get me to go with them to meet with the FARC and a group like the FARC, I had a bit of a problem with that too. It was kind of weird. I felt like a pawn, and I was a pawn, you know. I was being a pawn. And then I came back with all this stuff that really bothered me about it, and no one to really say it to. And then after I came home, everything just kind of hit at once, and I was like, you know, this isn't right. I'm in the wrong. I'm helping people, but it's still not right. You know, there's a lot of stuff going on that's not right. And so I just kind of wanted to get away at that point. They didn't really let me get away. You know, like I would still, because of what I had done, and because of the AK-47 thing, and the Venezuela thing, and the Panther thing, and the New Orleans thing, people would run things by me all the time. You know, they would run things by me and say, hey, like, you know, the Lakota Nation is declaring independence. Can you help us get guns to the Lakota Nation? And I'm like, I'm not going to get arms to them. And things really hit the fan when a Palestinian activist, an advocate who ran a nonprofit, approached me. That's when things hit the fan. At that point, I said, okay, these folks are going further with this than I did go, and I have the ability to stop them, you know? I have the ability to stop them cold in their tracks. That's how that relationship started, you know? And I felt horrible when I first contacted him. I was like, oh my God, you know, I can never tell anyone I did this. I turned someone into the FBI, you know? I can never tell. But I couldn't morally justify not doing so. I was like, who are these people around me that I can't tell that I stopped a bunch of Israelis from getting blown up? Why do I care what they think if that's a problem to them?
We turn now to a story out of Austin, Texas, that's shocked social justice activists nationwide. A prominent Austin-based activist named Brandon Darby has revealed he worked as an FBI informant in the 18 months leading up to the Republican convention.
Anytime there's a protest or a demonstration, for instance, like the Republican National Convention, you have folks who are exercising their rights, and they're organizing demonstrations and protests, you know, and they want to make a statement.
On the first day, it was not exactly the welcoming party Republicans had in mind when they picked St. Paul for their convention.
And they'll use civil disobedience and interrupt the flow a little bit of traffic to get attention, but that's their right to do that, you know, that's civil disobedience. That's what Martin Luther King did. That's what Gandhi did.
Somewhere between 5,000 and 10,000 demonstrators pushing for all kinds of causes and generally against the Iraq War pretty much got upstaged by a handful of guys in black wearing bandanas who call themselves anarchists.
Separate from that, you have a group of anarchists who organize, and they organize with more sinister, what they say is they organize to shut something down by any means necessary.
They were saying by any means necessary, which in a lot of anarchist parlance, that's a euphemism for arson, really.
And they're willing to use violence. They say that openly. They say any means necessary. They don't say any means necessary except violence. They say any means necessary. That's what they say.
One way or another, I'm gonna find ya. I'm gonna get you one way
so that's why the whole thing arose, and they said, hey, why don't you go along and have a look and make sure they're not getting anything too bad.
Darby's admitted to wearing recording devices at planning meetings and wearing a transmitter embedded in his belt during the convention. He's expected to testify on behalf of the government later this month in the trial of 2 Texas activists who were arrested at the RNC on charges of making and possessing Molotov cocktails.
There was a group of criminals who came here with a very expressed goal and intent. They came here to try and stop the convention, to crash the gates, to stop the buses and the delegates from being able to do their lawful duty. They failed.
But then immediately, after everything is said and done, what I didn't realize and calculate was the tendency of the moderate left to then cover for the ones who got in trouble for the crimes. The fact that I have to have some concern for safety at times because the American peace movement wants to get me, that says a lot about what that movement is.
The real awakening, first awakening, came when I was in France. I was living in France. My father was stationed over in the military. As a little kid, you hear noises over your head from adults. Different emotions, anger, sadness, excitement, fun, business talk. And then one day, there was a kind of a wailing in the house. And a book dropped down to my little world onto the little coffee table. I grabbed the book, and this was the source of the wailing in the house. It was Jet magazine. On the front page was a picture of the emaciated, destroyed face of Emmett Till. Emmett Till was one of the big civil rights cases in the 1950s and 60s. He was from Chicago. He went down to Mississippi to visit some relatives. He went into a local grocery store, and on his way out, he just happened to look at a white girl. You're not allowed to speak to white girls as a black kid, or look white people or white girls in the eyes. And he just said, hey, I think he just looked at her, something like that. Girl went home, tells her relatives, her father. They go to where the boy was staying with his relatives. They take the boy out of the house. The adult relative male couldn't do anything about it, he had guns. Took the boy down by the Mississippi River, and with their fists, they beat that boy to death. And that was the beginning of my awakening to something about my skin color and my existence that's harmful to white people. When I got back to the States, got to Alabama, Fort McClellan, Alabama, my father was stationed there. I think the second day I was there, where my older brother and I were out on the porch, out on the field, the playground, playing. There was a brown Hawaiian kid, this white kid were playing, and they saw me come up. The Hawaiian whispers into the white kid, his name was Trey. Rusty was the Hawaiian kid's name. Whispers into Trey's ear to call me a name. So Trey comes over, I'm minding my business, and he says, nigger. I'm like, I mean nothing to me. My older brother, who understood it, he said, you'd better hit him for calling you a nigger. And if you don't, I'm gonna hit you. And I did not want to tangle with my big brother. So I ball my little fist up, Trey balls his fist up, and I hit him in the eye, knocks him down. He gets up, I hit him in the eye again, he's bleeding. And he's screaming, runs home crying, and Rusty runs away from me. And then a few minutes or so later, Trey comes back out, crying, puts his hands out and says, I'm sorry, I apologize, that was wrong for me to say. What had happened was Trey went aside crying, and his daddy, who was a captain in the military, my father was a sergeant, crying, said, Daddy, Daddy, I said, what's the matter, boy? He said, that nigger, he hit me. His daddy said, what did you say? That nigger hit me. His daddy gave him a spanking of his life. And he came out and apologized, and Trey and I became good friends. I began to become more aware. Something is amiss here in our society. Then when the 1960s hit harder with the black, they call it revolution, it was a black cultural revolution. The dashikis, the afros, black power, we shall overcome, the civil rights movement. I got involved with that, and I got involved with the hippie movement, and got involved with the anti-war movement. I never desecrated the American flag. I didn't like it when they did it. I didn't hate, well, I didn't understand the United States. Then I got involved with A-Trap Brown, Black Panther militants, because the militant brothers had been telling us that it's time that we get black. So I got involved. I left the hippie movement, got involved with that. Then I discovered some things about the black movement I didn't like. When they said black power, whether we understood it or believed it or not, we had to go black power. Plus we were intimidated by other blacks, that if we know black power, it's like, what's wrong with him, right? They told us that when the revolution comes, when they start killing all the hunkies, if they see us on the street with them damn hippies, killing you too, nigga. See, and so we, yeah, black power. The thing that got me about the Panthers was not so much their rhetoric, because they frightened me. I was more afraid of the Panthers than I was of the police. That's why the Black Panther movement party has never caught on with black people.
Residents begin to tell me, they say, hey, Brandon, thank you for what you're doing. And I was like, no problem, it's a lot of us. And he said, thank you, thank all y'all, but know this, we work with you in spite of your politics, not because of your politics. We're not interested in your politics. And that was the most oppressed group of Americans that I can think of in my lifetime. And they still didn't hate America, you know? A lot of their kids were soldiers and cops. And at the time, remember, I hated the pig. I remember I had this little tape recorder because there was a lot of tension between myself and law enforcement officers at the time. You know, there was a lot of tension going on. But then came along this guy his name was John Bryson, and he was a captain of the 5th District, which encompassed the 9th Ward of New Orleans. And you know, he wasn't the nicest guy to me at first, but he wasn't mean either. And he called me one day and he said, you know, I was driving around my community thinking of how much I dislike you and what you stand for. And I said, that's funny, I was just thinking of how much I don't like you. And he said, but there were these kids going around giving out prescriptions to all these elderly people who came back, who y'all are helping come back, and I'm having a hard time disliking you when you're involved in stuff like that. And I said, well, you know, honestly, when you're talking to me like this, I'm having a hard time disliking you. And I had this tape recorder, and one of the folks from the media collective had borrowed it to do an interview with the police. And sometime after it had occurred, I started going through the recordings just to hear what was on it and have memories. And I heard this woman from the media collective screaming at police officers, you know, and I heard her screaming at other reporters about how they were fascists and they were this and they were this and they were that and they were this and they were that. And this whole time in my mind, I had this mentality, and we had promoted this idea that the cops and the media and everyone was against us because we were challenging the status quo. We were challenging the power structure. And the truth was, they were primarily against us because we were assholes. We were big assholes about it. He and I meet up, we start talking, and we start figuring out how can we help people. And I thought, I was like, he's just trying to spy on me because I'm an activist and everyone knows. And this is something very prominent in the left. When I accepted John Bryson's invite to come eat dinner with his family and talk about the 9th Ward, that helped more people, us talking about that, than me throwing rocks at him ever helped, you know? And you know, figuratively, of course. But that helped a lot of folks, you know, that change in attitude.
I don't know if you remember when the car blew up, that there was a car supposedly, it was in Bel Air, Maryland, north of Baltimore, about 30 miles north of Baltimore. And apparently a couple of guys had come to Baltimore with a bomb. And unfortunately for them, the bomb blew up in the car and killed them. You know, of course, we wanted to blame the CIA, the FBI, and of course, it was all proved wrong. But that awakened me to some stuff, though. What was going on behind the scenes, Bill Kunstler was there, and stuff that was going on. I just was not the movement, the idealistic movement that I thought that we were about.
They started to become a big realization for me that there were just things wrong. Mumia Abu-Jamal, I always thought this guy was innocent. I thought the government set him up because he was a Black Panther Party member, you know, but as I started to get to know other prominent Black Panther Party members, they would say things to me privately like, of course Mumia did it, but that's not the point, you know, that's not the point. And you say, well, that is the point actually, because that's why I'm sitting here fighting for him to get out, is because I really thought this guy didn't do it. And when you look at the facts and you say, well, this guy he didn't even claim his innocence at trial. He didn't claim his innocence until way later when the ACLU and the Lawyers Guild people started helping him articulate a way to attack the country with him being held accountable. And these kind of things start to affect you. You know, if you're a thinking person, you say, well, I did wrong. You know, like, I am wrong. I advocated for that. I am dead wrong. You know, so now I'm dead wrong and I need to do something to make it right.
And then sometime after that, I continued my quest to find out who I was, why I was here, why am I born, what is my mission, what's my purpose. And one day, after ODing, nearly killing myself in Palm Springs, up in the mountains, I ran into some Jesus people in Hollywood. And then I became a minister, or the leader of the Jesus People movement. And then I thought I was a minister, until I realized I wasn't.
I thought I would just get away from these folks and make it right that way. And that's what I primarily did.
When I arrived here, I saw the homeless situation, and I began to criticize, once again, everybody for it. God spoke to me, I believe, and told me that I talk too much, and that if I know so much, I need to go out and do something about homelessness. And in fact, he said, don't bother talking to me until you go and do that. So I did, and the rest is history.
And I said, wait a minute, like, my mind has believed some spin, you know? My mind has believed some revisionist history that was apparently designed to further the cause of the movement for peace and justice, which isn't peace and justice.
So we're asking you a question. When you hear the word rebel, what comes to mind? Rebel. Rebel.
Anti-establishment on some form or level.
Africa.
What?
Africa.
Okay.
Rebel. The Dukes of Hazzard. Russia.
Russia?
Rebel. Somebody's got a cause. Somebody that wants to make a message clear.
I had accessed the halls of my heroes, and they weren't heroes at all, you know? They weren't heroes to me anymore at all. I began to think that they were dishonest and disingenuous, and that they said whatever they had to say to reinforce the narrative. They helped people. That's true, they helped a lot of people, you know? But I tell you what, they weren't my heroes anymore. And so I began to think, well, you know, this narrative that these people have been my elders, who I've read their books and I've believed for so much, and I thought because they were helping people that everything they said was gospel, and I'm starting to realize that they don't tell the truth all the time. There's a narrative because there's a belief in their mind that it is morally okay to control what information you get to make sure that you live correctly and in the way that's right. And that's scary.
You're going through life and you ended up becoming a political person. How did that happen?
Well, actually, I always said that if Hillary Clinton ever ran for president, that I would do anything I could for her to help her. So I've always been a big fan of the Clintons. Boy, that was a tough decision for me to make the day that I called up the McCain campaign and said, you know, I'm a Hillary supporter. I've got a team of volunteers here in Chicago, and I want to start volunteering as Democrats for McCain and working for the McCain campaign. And, you know, my life took an interesting roller coaster road after that, because it was shortly after that, you know, the left and that my former party, you know, declared essentially war on me and everyone like me who didn't fall in line and didn't want to go along with the craziness that they decided to engage in. What's interesting is growing up, I grew up in Cleveland, Ohio, and I was always a Democrat. When I was a kid in grade school, I remember one of the nuns asking us as a class, it must have been a presidential election year, and she asked, what's the difference between a Democrat and a Republican? And we all raised our hands, and she called on me, and I said, Democrats are good and Republicans are evil. And everyone else in the class put their hands down, and we looked at the teacher because that's the answer they would have given to. And she smiled, and she said, no, that's not quite it, but you see, that's what we were taught.
I was a Democrat because my folks were Democrats. We got bamboozled, as Malcolm X says. We got bamboozled into the Democratic Party. But for years, even when I was a so-called trying to be a minister, I recognized the failure of the African-American leadership at that time. How we were really screwed up as a people, and Jesse Jackson's guys want to help us out. All right. When I became an activist for the homeless, And I really saw how bad it was and that they were not involved. After also, I tried to support Jesse Jackson for president. When I found out a few other things, I realized that my real enemy were the Democrats. So I left the Democrats and became an independent politically.
I had never really done anything that, caused people to hate me or to see me as a controversial figure. I was always in event planning and nonprofit development consulting and healthcare consulting. So very innocuous, non-political, out there kinds of things. Our Hillary group, once she suspended her campaign, there were a lot of people who were very afraid for their careers and for their businesses, or even their personal safety, so that they didn't want to be seen as openly supporting a Republican ever, especially in a city like Chicago.
As a homeless activist, the socialist activist of downtown LA, homeless activist, was putting the word out in the street that I was a conservative, that I was a Republican. As far as I was concerned, Republicans and conservatives were rednecks, bigots, right-wingers. Don't call me no Republican. And I never understood that until I began to realize they'd been listening to my rhetoric, and more than I was listening to it.
What I began to find out was I was a caring person, and I had bought into a narrative that left was caring and right was for rich people who didn't care about other people. That's what I fell into. That's what I believed. And I bought into it, but when the pedal hit the metal, I began to realize that I had a lot of similarities that weren't so left of center. I had a lot of things I believed and felt that weren't so left of center at all. But I didn't know that at the time.
I was telling homeless people, we need to get off of welfare. We need to create our own jobs, our own businesses. We need to take control and some ownership. I didn't know those conservative ideals. I didn't know that. I was saying about responsibility. Study my history of how the Republicans, not Democrats, set us free from slavery. How it was Republicans who fought for us, and the Democrats were the ones who enslaved us. That's when I began to realize I'm going to become a Republican. And I did. And then I realized, oh, now I see what the socialist homeless activists were saying about me. And they were correct. That I was a conservative Republican of all things. God.
The people who are drawn to the left, they have this in them that if they see someone speaking out or someone's challenging things, that they just naturally will go after you with everything they've got to try to scare you to shut up. As much grief as I took for that, the black supporters of Hillary, it was a living nightmare for them because they were called race traitors. They were intimidated, they were bullied in their own community, and it was a constant thing all throughout the campaign. And those of us that chose to break from the party and to vote Republican for the first time in our lives and support a Republican campaign for the first time in our lives, we really got hammered. You didn't have a choice, especially me as a gay man. They said, if you're gay, you have to vote Democrat. And if not, then you're a racist and you're a traitor. And, you're anti-gay, which is, bizarre. But if you follow their train of thought, anyone who defies them and tries to get off the reservation that they've created for the Democrat Party, if you get outside of that, as a gay man, I'm not allowed to vote anything but Democrat. And if I dare try to, they're going to stamp you down to make sure that others don't follow your example and do this as well.
When I was little and, and going to school, I like to think that I had more of a expanded vocabulary, right? So in speaking in the fashion that I would speak, I would get accused of trying to be white. So right off the bat, of course, that's going to set off some bells. And it's like, okay, well, let me get this straight. I speak in a certain manner that sounds intelligent. Is that what you're saying to me? So maybe what you're telling me is that when I sound white, I sound intelligent. And does that mean that intelligence is something that's exclusive to only white people? And on the other side of that, in order for me to qualify as sounding black, I have to sound stupid? Do you realize that you're insulting yourself? You're not really not insulting me? You know, I mean, this is something that, thank God this bell went off in my head when I was a little kid. Where does it start from? If I can jump toward maybe back, maybe like the late 90s, you know, before the Bush administration, before 9/11, all that sort of stuff. When I was going back and forth to LA for a little bit. But in the later 90s, I was spending more time in LA. And I was exposed to even more liberalism. And when I was playing in groups, I had to ask the questions. You know, it's you know, I'm thinking I'm liberal. I'm supposed to be liberal. I'd be playing with these musicians who are supposed to be very tolerant and open-minded and all accepting. But if you challenge their narrative, all that tolerance and acceptance goes out of the window. But I would listen to the things that they believe, and I was like, well, you know, I'm supposed to believe this, but I don't. You know, and I had to start asking the questions. And being the open-minded liberal that I'm supposed to be, I actually did open my mind. And when I did, I found that I was a conservative. And the musicians that I'd be playing with, of course, they're, you know, music, you lean to the left. And that's usually like the typical thing. So I ended up being the odd man out. So doing these things with these musicians, like, look, man, I'm tired of arguing with y'all. We're not getting anything done. We're hardly playing any shows. You guys want to use rehearsal time to argue about politics all the time. So you know what? I'm just going to go do my thing. So as I told you, I was a martial arts instructor. So when I shut down my school, you know, after hours, I would set up my camera and I would just start talking. And eventually I started writing up scripts, and then I put them up on MySpace, right? So from MySpace, I started to get a little bit of following, you know, with these videos. And then somebody said, hey man, why don't you put these things up on YouTube? Well, it started getting hits, 10,000, you know, 50,000, 100,000, and went viral, right? And then from there, I just kept on doing them. The videos would start to go from 100,000, they started stepping into the millions.
There's this agenda where it says there are white people and there are people of color. You know, somehow grouping every other person on the planet and ethnicity in together as an opposing force to white people. And I don't agree with that. You know, like, I really don't agree with that. And you can't say that now, because if you say that, you're a racist. You're a white supremacist racist who doesn't understand.
The Marxists and the Socialists have a document of their own which states that the way they'll take America down was 4 pillars. And I think the 4th one was through black people, playing on Jim Crow, slavery, their anger, and we'll whip that up. And it's worked. And what they have done over the years now is they put it into our mind through black socialists. You're acting white by taking books home to school to study. You're acting white by speaking proper English, knowing that if you take your books home and get education and speak proper English, you're going to elevate socially, politically, economically, and so forth. The last thing the Marxists and socialists want for America is for black people to act white.
And so mostly it was just like white academics and white intellectuals, you know, who found a couple of token black leaders to agree with them.
I did like different kinds of music, but because I was open to listen to this kind of music, I was wanting to be white. It's like, are you serious? Are you kidding me? Just because I like this revokes my black card? So I caught heat for it. Sometimes people want to fight, you know, just because you thought differently from they do. It's like, man, I don't even get this. So another thing that sets off that bell that kind of helps me to know that I'm in the right place is when I say I'm a Republican. Oh, you're a Republican. You must want to be white. Oh, it's familiar territory again. So it looks like the ones who are really trying to keep shackles on people are you. You don't want people to think freely. You don't want people to express themselves freely. You hate oppression. You hate what the white man has done to you, yet you want to do the same thing.
The real cause of the race slavery rule in this country is not white people. It's not the United States. It's black people. We black people. You see, there is a canard that the black man and the white man was getting along fine one day. They're all just living great. One day the white man decides to turn himself into a devil. So he attacks the black man, beats him up, and enslaves the black man. And so ever since that day, the black man has been trying to claw his way back up to the top and revenge and black power. It's not true. The black man, when the white man, the Portuguese and the Spaniards of Europe showed up on the west coast of Africa to trade for animate or inanimate commodities, they saw slaves. they saw the profit motive with the slaves that blacks and Muslims had already going on. The wound of slavery was inflicted in Africa. And black people are going to have to, at some point, admit to God, to each other, and to white folks this truth, that had we not been practicing slavery in Africa already, this would have never happened.
I gotta say, with Republican and Democrat, one of the reasons why I'm comfortable with being a Republican is because no Republican's ever told me what I'm supposed to be. I've had plenty of Democrats tell me that I'm supposed to be a Democrat because I'm black. You know, it's like, oh, hold on, man. You know, this is America. This is a free country. I'll be what I want.
You know, prior to December 29th of 2008, there just wasn't, there was a lot of media stuff about things that I had been a part of, but there just wasn't anything really negative out there.
In an open letter to the activist community, Darby maintained he only acted to prevent violent actions by a small group that he says would have undermined the cause of social justice.
But after that, all of a sudden, everything was very negative.
I had previously just written anonymously, and I ran my website anonymously because I wanted to still be able to make a living here in Chicago. And they outed me by name, and they went after me, and they called me a racist for not supporting Obama, and a traitor for being gay and not supporting the Democrat Party. And gosh, like they took away my life.
Yeah, everything good I'd ever done was taken away, you know. I was like not there anymore. I was no longer a co-founder of an organization, you know. I had no longer done any good work in New Orleans. I had participated in some efforts, or, you know, these kind of things were said, and amongst a lot of bad things.
They will ostracize you and turn you into a pariah and do whatever they can to do malicious things to destroy you. And gleefully so.
That's what they do. That's what historically the far left has done, you know, like it's almost like they can erase pictures.
So when people would Google you to try to hire you or to use your company for something, they're not going to because you're branded a racist.
It affects work too, you know. Like right now, it's easy for me to find employment with people who identify as conservatives, but I live in an area where most people don't.
You know, socially, you know, they destroy you and they whisper and they look at you and say, oh, there's that guy. That's that troublemaker. You know, he's the one that he's a conservative, and, you know, shun you like you have some sort of a disease. And this is supposed to be the tolerant left. So whenever you hear, especially gay activists, shouting about conservatives are so evil and the Republican Party is so evil, I want to tell you something, not just during the Hillary campaign, but during the McCain and Palin campaign and in the years since, I've traveled all around the country, I've traveled all throughout the South. Not once have I ever had a conservative person be cruel to me, be even rude to me for being a gay male, but every day I'm subjected to such horrors and such persecution for being a gay conservative. So it's like I had to come out twice in my life. The first time, you know, coming out as gay and being open about who I am, no conservatives were evil to me, but coming out as a conservative in the gay community, they absolutely want to destroy me.
Because I had been so public before, you know, and so many things had happened, I really felt like the chances are I was going to get seriously attacked for it in the media, you know, and seriously attacked. I was surprised that the New York Times and the mainstream media took that approach. I was very surprised by it, you know.
Really?
New York Times got a hold of me, and this Colin Moynihan, I think his name was, and we were talking, and I said, you know, I'll give a couple of brief statements, but I can't do an interview about the details of the case. I'm sorry. And he was like, well, you know, this story is kind of coming out, and there's a lot of people who are in the peace activist community who feel betrayed by what you've done and by the government. They don't trust the government now. And I said, okay, some of the people in the peace movement just made bombs. Like, why is that not the story? You know, and he's like, it's just not going that way, man. You know, and I was like, why is it not going that way? And he was like, it's just not going that way. I said, okay, Colin, that's cool, man.
It's funny, like, everything is topsy-turvy, the world's turned upside down for me, because this is the complete opposite of what I was taught as a child.
And it is hard for me because I recognize that my perspectives, you know, were changing very heavily because of my experiences that I was going through very rapidly, you know. So it's hard to really pinpoint, like, oh, okay, the media, you know, is it left or is it right? But now, in the subtle nuance, like clearly from the situation at the New York Times, there were a group of people who were sitting in a room discussing what the story would be and how it would be spun. And they said, oh, if we spin it this way, you know, it looks like the left is committing violence against conservatives, and that might boost McCain or Palin. If we spin it this way, if we spin it that way. And they clearly came out with a spin that I think is horrible, but they clearly came out with a spin that would promote the Democratic Party and promote the left's agenda. A lot of times I think with media and with, like, same with academia, they'll say, well, we're not left or right, we're just logical. That's the argument they use. We're just logical. And now how on earth you take a situation right before an election where someone makes bombs to throw at individuals, how you take that and turn that into, the peace movement is upset at the government's betrayal. You know, that's a little too far out there for me. I still identify as an activist. You know, I think Martin Luther King was an activist. I don't think he'd identify with the anarchist agenda at all. In fact, I think it's another one of those deals where you say that, like the New York Times said, the Austin activist community. And it's like, are you telling me that the conservative men and women who volunteer at shelters and donate money at shelters and have toy drives, and are they offended by the government stopping this bomb plot? I don't think so. But they're not included in your narrative, you know? They're not included.
Don't refer to, people like me here in the Midwest as, these bitter religion-clinging, gun-clinging, Midwesterners, and put us down. And Donna Brazile and Howard Dean at the DNC both looked down upon us as well and said that the party doesn't need us, that it could be an urban, black, young party, and that they don't need these blue-collar Midwestern people in it any longer. But the fact is, it remains that there's still a huge split to this day with people who were lifelong Democrats until 2008 who are now disgusted by the party, disgusted largely by these Alinsky tactics that were aimed for the first time at members of the Democrat Party.
And I knew someday the story would come back around, I figured it would if I wanted it to. But I knew it was going to be a while.
Used what?
I even used Wikipedia.
Oh man, you did the real research. Shit. You didn't actually read anything I wrote. You just read Wikipedia, which is an interpretation of what I wrote.
And the New York Times. I have 4 children.
How old?
15, 10, 8, and 2.
Isn't that the best?
It is. I saw somewhere that you had described yourself as a small C communist. And I describe myself as a small L libertarian. Now, I don't know if that makes us opposites, but I found a quote of yours where I was in 100% agreement, and so I thought we'd start there.
Do your thing. Tell me when we're rolling.
Are we on?
We are rolling.
We're
okay,
rolling.
Go ahead.
You could not be a moral person with the means to act and stand still.
True.
I'm going to say I'm 100%. I want you to.
Yeah. Well, absolutely. I mean, the problem that all of us face is that we live in a going world. History is in the making. We're not at the end of history. And each of us, not only your 2-year-old and your 15-year-old, but you yourself, and not only a young person like you, but an older person like me, we are all works in progress. And since we're works in progress on a moving train, being neutral is absurd. It's essential to be wide awake. I mean, you can't be a moral person if you don't open your eyes, number one. Number two, be astonished at everything you see, both the ecstasy and the joy of life, and also the agony and the pain, and especially the undeserved pain, the pain that we visit upon one another. And then it's your responsibility to do something, even though whatever you do will be inadequate, partial, contingent, probably stupid. And then your job is to open your eyes again, act again, doubt again. And that's the rhythm, it seems to me, of both activism and morality.
So, someday when these trials are over, I'm probably going to say my opinions, you know. But then, you know, life goes on and you don't want to. And you think, well, I live out in the country, I have chickens and animals and a garden, you know, I'm okay. And I think I'm just going to let this go. But I don't feel like that's the option I had. You know, the option I had was either to walk away and get rocks pummeling me in the back of the head, or to turn around and start to speak my mind, you know, and that's what I've opted for.
You know, we grow up, I mean, I was raised and sent to public school and elementary school and civics class and raised on all the ideals that our civilization is supposedly built on, and the principles that our system of government is built on. And then, you know, I got into the world and I started to see how much corruption there is and how money talks, and how sometimes you know, there are just some grave injustices in this world. It's not difficult to see. And then I became very disillusioned and thought, this is not right. You know, we must cast out this evil and have good guys run the show. And, you know, then you read history and you realize that the good guys have been throwing the bad guys out since the beginning of history, and it's really an ongoing process.
The fact that the founding fathers founded this country on a gamble, in my opinion. They gambled. They gambled with the posterity, who we are today. What I mean by that? When they said, we the people of the United States, when they created this republic democracy, they were gambling that this particular group of human beings would not behave as human beings have behaved over the last 5,000 years of recorded history by which we lived on the monarchs. Human beings have a natural tendency to want to be told what to do. We don't like to make decisions. We fight for the vote, the freedom to vote, to vote, to vote. Once we get the freedom to vote, what do? We don't vote.
I began to really respect the stability we have. You know, like in our organization, in our parallel revolutionary movement or whatever we had, we couldn't institutionalize anything. Like if I left for a few days, or if Malik left or someone else left, people threw a coup. It was like a banana republic, you know? And I started to realize just this like thing that we have in the US called stability, and like this system of checks and balances, as imperfect as they are, they're institutionalized. I started to appreciate that a lot.
Living here in Chicago and having the hate thrown at me from the gay community for me being a conservative, and then to go to a big conservative event and not feel any kind of hatred, but to just be enveloped in love, and to just see people so proud of their country, and to be praising and honoring our men and women in uniform, and to be honoring the flag and honoring what America stands for, and people who just want opportunity and to be able to work hard and do good for their families. It was an amazing thing, and it really energized me. It charged my batteries, and it made me see that, you know, you're not alone.
You know, I'm not really, believe it or not, I'm not really a big political buff. I'm not. I just understand that I really dig being free. And I know that having freedom takes maintenance work. That's all it comes down to. I'm not thinking of myself as like this professional political whiz kid or anything like that. It's just like, look, man, you know, this is our house, man. We got to keep it clean.
It seems radically different from being a revolutionary with an AK-47, you know, and having the support of the majority of the left, which is what the case was, which is kind of proves my point, I think, the fact that they were supportive of me at that time. And then years later, working undercover with the FBI, I don't think that as much as that is different, the substance of what that is, the core of what the drive was, isn't different at all.
How would you define the two sides in America?
Like Republican and Democrats?
Like whatever.
Well, there are really only two sides, I guess. Either ultra-conservative or ultra-liberal.
The two sides. How would you yourself define
I don't like the fact that people make it two sides. Okay. So I try to avoid that. People tag me as a liberal, but I don't like to say that because that just puts you in one place, and that is a horrible thing to do.
On economic matters, I tend towards socialism. On governmental matters, I tend toward anarchism. patriotism. In terms of sexuality, I tend towards being a libertarian. In terms of the First Amendment, I'm a fundamentalist. In terms of education, I'm a universalist. In terms of prisons, I'm an abolitionist. So where do we go with all that? It seems to me it's way more complicated than a simple label will allow you to feel, now I get it.
Sometimes I think the notions of right and left are very much concocted to confuse the political dialogue.
It seems so polemic, it seems so, like you say, left and right fighting and bitter and everything's fun and so disingenuous,
What if there were more than two sides to every issue, but the two parties wanted to box you into a corner, one of their corners? What if there's no such thing as public opinion, because every thinking person has opinions that are uniquely his own? What if what we call public opinion was just a manufactured narrative that makes it easier to convince people that if their views are different, then there's something wrong with that, or there's something wrong with them?
Okay, your name is?
My name is James Werner.
And you were a libertarian gubernatorial candidate.
Yes.
Is it depressing being a libertarian?
No, it's wonderful. Every day it's a new experience of being delighted with political theory and an absolute anonymity.
One thing that's important to me is I understand that you don't want to make it, Republican or Democrat, and it'd be great if we could all just be Americans. But the thing is that there are two distinct ideas of what America is.
Most people fall more on the conservative or liberal end of the spectrum rather than the center, which is what we consider the libertarian position to be.
This is my philosophy.
There's a stark difference between how, I'll say the left and the right, but really what I'm referring to is I'm referring to people who would put a flag in their yard and people who would burn the flag in your yard. There seems to be some differences in this, like a division. And I think usually the people who would put a flag in their yard believe in individual freedom and responsibility because that's what the nation was founded upon. And so that does identify them on the conservative end of things to some degree.
We do not and should not, as human beings, bow down to symbols like the American flag, like the cross, like the crescent moon. Symbols like that are unhuman, anti-human, and they short-circuit thinking. So partly I feel that way about symbols, partly I never got the patriotic gene. I'm not a patriot in the nationalist sense. I think as soon as you're a patriot, you're against humanity. And I'm for humanity. That means I don't think the fact that I was thrust accidentally into this country makes me have to be proud about this country. This country is a mix of lies and truths. It's a mix of greatness and horror. It's a mix of war and peace. And why would you embrace the war part? Why would you embrace the genocide part? Why would you embrace the slavery part? I don't embrace that. Therefore, the flag to me, being a symbol that we're supposed to bow down to, is something I resist and reject.
Being American, I guess the word that comes to mind is lucky. But the thing is people, they'll get mad at you for thinking of yourself as being lucky to be in America. I was like, okay, well, if you got this mindset that you're lucky, that you didn't have to do anything, you were just born here, you're lucky. It's like, look, you've grown, man. If you really feel like that, you can leave. You can make that decision. You don't have, just because you're born here doesn't mean that you have to choose to stay here. And as well as, being lucky, I guess those kind of blessings come with a sense of responsibility.
Now, how would you define the two sides politically in America?
The haves and the have-nots.
The reason I eschew the left-right dichotomy is that because the left in this form of dialogue, the left side of the argument is all about the collective, and the right side is all about the individual. The problem is that humans are both.
We respect and revere the individual, and we respect and revere the community. Those two things are in contradiction, and that contradiction is a living contradiction. And you don't resolve it by saying, I'm a small L libertarian or I'm a small C communist. It doesn't answer your problem. The problem is we are a community of individuals, and it is true that the full development of each is the condition for the full development of all of us. But it's also true that we are each the one and only who will ever trod the earth. There'll never be another like you. And that should be respected and revered, and we should be in awe of it. On the other hand, we are also part of a community. We share a community together, and we actually couldn't do it all by ourselves, nor should we.
The first communist, in my opinion, were the Christians in the book of Acts. But it wasn't forced by a government. It was by the will of God and other people. And it was set there as a temporary measure until things would get better economically. All these people had everything in common. They were one. I think that that's where a lot of this comes from. But they're trying to get the government to force a communal, collective lifestyle upon all of us equally, when that is wrong. It's impossible to do.
Making people think that it's the morally right thing to do to allow the government to come in and take people's money to give to somebody else, there's no morality in that.
See, I don't believe in equality. I don't think there's such a thing as equality as such. I believe in equity. What you put in life is what you get out of life. It's what we taught the homeless at Justiceville. We're not going to give you anything in Justiceville. But here is Justiceville, a fallow field. You come in the field, you cultivate it, you work it, it will give you a harvest. But if you don't work it, you don't get a harvest.
Efforts at having government control every aspect of people's lives is, I think that's evil, even though it's probably well-intentioned, you know?
Right, well, didn't C.S. Lewis say save us from people with good intentions?
I still want to see a fair planet. What my ideas are different. I don't think fair means taking everything you have and giving it away to people, doing what Mugabe has done. I don't think that's fair. I used to.
I align myself with a group that fits more of the idea of America that I have, and that would be the Republican Party, more so the conservative Republican Party. So from there, it's can we grow that tent until more people see America for what the Founding Fathers actually saw it for. This place that will guarantee protection for the blessed rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
It's very easy to say these are the basic rights now, but the problem is it doesn't resolve anything that we're facing today. What are basic rights?
Democrats are really far from those founding principles. One, they believe that government grants you these rights of life, liberty, pursuit of happiness. They don't. The government's job is just to protect those rights. They don't give them. So with coming back to social justice, that really just comes down to, there's already been a word for that. It's called the golden rule. Jesus already came out and he laid down that rule already. That's the rule I follow, not the man-made concept of social justice.
The day that I showed up with a boat and I was sent away by FEMA and by the military, 278 or 292, it was almost 300 people, 300 boats showed up with a crew of people, so much more than 300 people, showed up and they were sent away by the government, And they were sent away by the government because now I know FEMA and Parks and Wildlife and all these other groups were having a fight over who had jurisdiction for search and rescue. So rather than deal with it or try to find a solution to help people, they sent American citizens away, and they had this attitude that we are the government, we will deal with it. And it was like, well, you're not dealing with it. So I just went anyways. And I guess the reason that the left ended up doing more relief initially is because the far left has been, we were more accustomed to getting arrested or having challenges with police and law enforcement and not being supportive of them. So it didn't mean anything to us to say, screw you, and just go in anyways. But the conservative hunters and fishers, they wanted to follow the rules initially. Though most of the people in every governmental agency who was there were really trying to help people, they couldn't figure it out because government doesn't do the best job. And people need to be empowered to help themselves and protect themselves.
Now, have you ever had a deeply held political or philosophical belief that then changed 180 degrees in your life?
Well, I'm not a fan of the United States government system as far as the democracy because it's gone way too corrupt.
It's stupid and outdated, honestly.
There's better solutions to government.
Such as?
I don't know, in my eyes, socialism.
Under the right leader.
I think when you're younger, your beliefs are a little different than as you mature, you have kids. So yeah, I probably had I don't know if I've had deep felt beliefs that have changed, but I definitely am willing to tweak the model. I mean, that's what dialogue's all about. I'm willing to admit if I'm wrong about something.
You know, I think as a leftist activist, you know, and not just leftist activists, I think activists from any perspective, you know, wherever they're coming from, they're in an insular world oftentimes, you know, like we read the things that support our worldview and encourage us in our worldview, and so we lose the understanding of the nuances of other perspectives' arguments, you know. So naturally what happens is, just like with people on the left calling Tea Party members teabaggers and the dehumanization that occurs, you know, where there's a strong dehumanization that occurs across the board with any group who has what seems like an opposing worldview. And I think that I had all of my information was coming from multiple sources, but from one system of logic. And then I went to New Orleans, and because of the position I was in, I had to interact with people with different worldviews. I had to interact with people who were involved in, you know, who represented the U.S. government in different levels, and people who represented law enforcement, and people who represented the corporations who were there cleaning up and had a huge profit motive to be there cleaning up, you know, and so forth. But what I started to learn was, as I got to know people, my brain no longer allowed me to dehumanize them as an enemy.
Every minute, every day, I change, as does everyone, as do you. And it's true that I've had a life that is at points tumultuous, at points, you know, more even. But if I were to look back and say, what are my great accomplishments, I would say raising 3 extraordinary young men is the thing I'm both proudest of and least ambivalent about. Do I have regrets? Even there, of course. I mean, you can't be 20 years old and not have a lot of regrets. And so certainly, I'm 66 years old, so surely I have regrets, not only personal regrets, but political regrets. But nobody gets to kind of start over. Everybody has to lean forward. And so I take as my responsibility the job of kind of forward motion. You know, one of the things that happens because of the undeserved and unwanted celebrity or notoriety that I've had in the last few years is there's a sense of kind of sticking me on a board and saying, the guy from the 60s, the guy who did these things. But I've never thought of myself that way. I'm not nostalgic for a ship that already left the shore. I'm actually living forward, and whatever the 60s was, and mostly it's a media construction, but whatever it was prelude to what's happening right now.
There are times in life and moments in history where people need to stand up.
As much as I don't want to be involved in politics, it sure makes it hard not to be, you know, because there's so much stuff going on that I just think is horrible.
I'm very much I would say, nowadays I say a progressive populist. And I've always been attracted to the romance of the revolutionary. But as I've seen the world and been involved in politics and in nonviolent direct action and writing about and reading about politics, I've realized that we really do, in the industrial world, have a civil society. And it may not be perfect, and it certainly doesn't provide perfect justice for everyone. It's not really something we need to overthrow by violence in order to start over. You know, I think we've got a pretty good attempt at mediation going. It just needs improvement. You know, I guess I'm not a radical then, am I? Maybe it's sad to realize that.
Initially, when my name became public and there was such a massive attack, you know, I realized, I was like, you know, there could be a lot of potential, as uncomfortable as this is, a lot of potential for good in this. You know, they have in fact given me much more of a platform than I deserve, you know, much more of a platform than I would have had otherwise. And I should probably use that for the things I believe in. Hello, this is Brandon. My address, which is also the address of the organization, which we've opened as a shelter, is it's on our website. And you're with the Tea Party in the Woodlands. The network that we're building is going to be really significant in the future, because whenever there's a disaster anywhere, We can put the call out to Tea Party groups and 9/12 groups and other liberty-minded groups and patriots. You know, I think folks in the liberty-minded movement are used to, we're critiquing what's going on with our federal government, but we have to show another option. We talked about that earlier. I mentioned that. I said there's this narrative where if you want to vote to help people, you vote for the left, and if you want to vote for white, racist, rich people, you vote for the right. That's not an accurate narrative, though. You know, we have to show that. So the narrative becomes, if you want to vote for a big centralized government forcing people to help people inefficiently, half of which are just milking the system, vote for the left. But if you want to vote for individuals and communities, helping other individuals and communities in an efficient way, vote for the right. And that's what we have to change it to. And I think it's possible, because I think that's the reality.
Being one of those people out there say, hey, look at that guy. You know, he doesn't seem like one of those stuffy, uptight country club Republicans that we've been led to believe. I mean, there's some out there, don't get me wrong. And part of it, I'm one of those guys that are trying to say, yeah, we're trying to separate ourselves from you. You guys are out of touch and you don't get it.
Surveys and studies and polls indicate that only about 13% of the American population is genuinely libertarian in the sense of the way it's understood by the founding fathers and by libertarians today.
This is more of a cultural fight than it is a political fight. And I understand that, you know, with the Tea Parties, it's okay, we're going to kick these guys out of office, right? So, okay, well, that's all well and good, but now you got a political victory. You haven't done anything in the culture, because it's the culture that gives these guys their power in the first place.
I'm challenging all of these conservative blacks and Tea Party blacks right now, and I'll send you my material on this. They're great at talking with white people behind closed doors and writing stuff, but you don't see them get out here in the streets and walking the streets and talking with black folks and the guys on the corner, marching, demonstrating, educating. But they're very good at knocking us.
I can't help but think of different movies I've seen where, you know, people were standing up against the tide and, you know, the odds are against them, but they hold their ground. And if you believe in something and if you love something, you need to do that. And you need to take the lumps that come. And it's unfortunate, but there are moments in history when that needs to happen, and we're in one of those right now.
If we deem that our people are redeemable, then the question is, how are we going to do it apart from socialist, Marxist ideals of addressing the masses? How are we going to take conservative, capitalist ideals to address the masses?
Just help people, and the relationships and the organizing will be a result of helping people. That's better. That's solid. That works.
We're not going to give you nothing, because we recognize giving you does not help you. We want to partner with you. If we don't have a partner, we can't help you. And that's what's got to happen in this country.
Do you consider yourself a political person?
Somewhat. More so the older I get. When I was younger, it was like I would let everybody else take care of it. Now it's kind of up to me.
I have been transformed, and I think that there is no going back for me, even if I really wanted to. I think that I'm a different person now. I'm someone who is unafraid of standing up and in speaking out. And I really hope that, you know, through all my friends and all the people that I'll meet for the rest of my life, that I can instill that in them, at least to some degree, that you should and you can stand up for what you believe in, whatever it is. And I don't care if you believe 180 degrees opposite of me, you know, speak up about it and stand up and do something about it, and I'll applaud you too, because that's how this country should be.
I think conversations like this are actually the name of the game, in the sense that one of the core essences of democracy is learning how to talk to strangers, is learning how to talk across ideological and racial and gender and generational divides.
It's really hard to be an extremist, I'll put it that way, when you can see the humanity in other people.
But the similarities get blunted through the differences, but we can find the similarities when we learn how to talk with one another. So I would say talking to strangers is essential, and I wouldn't dismiss this or be impatient with it. I would say talking to people who you think you have profound disagreements with is actually a good exercise in democratic living.
Through the dialogue, we'll develop something, you know, hopefully closer to perfection. It'll certainly be something closer to palatable to everyone that we can live with without resorting to civil war.
People don't like to be offended. They don't like their most cherished ideals to be contradicted. So while they believe in free speech in theory, a lot of times they might oppose it in a specific instance, and that's true with a lot of our civil liberties.
So is it depressing to be a libertarian?
Looking forward, you don't know what the hell's going to happen. Looking backward, you're sure you would have been on the side of the angels, but that's a convenient and delusional way to live. So I look forward, and since I don't know what's going to happen, I get out of bed every day hopeful, believing that what human beings do or don't do will make a difference.
So we're trying to set up a model here, and one of the problems that I'm a little concerned about, but I know it's going to work out, I know that God will work it out, is that we're setting up our home as a model, and everyone's saying, well, what if you open your home up and nobody helps you? And I'm like, that's not going to happen. You know, I don't believe that. Thank you. It's such an encouragement. Thank you for your call. Yeah, thank you for helping.
So the Founding Fathers are gambling that the day when this new nation is seriously threatened to be destroyed, that somehow the American people, we the people, will find it within ourselves to do that which is unnatural, to save this nation and keep it a free democratic republic. That's the gamble. That's why I say America's an experiment. Can we make it? Where it's looking right now, it's a 50-50 toss-up.
I'm very, very optimistic and very positive about the future. I know the future's going to be a lot of hard work.
If somebody's obviously trying to work hard and they lost their home, then we can help them. And the only catch is like, well, what do I have to do to stay there? So you have to help me help other people. That's the catch, you know? That's the catch. You have to help me help other people. People can make sure resources are being used effectively to people who are actually trying to help themselves, you know? Get on their feet. And as long as people are willing to help other people, it's going to be a great situation.
Yeah, I'm a smart guy. I can find things out. I could do without certain things. People have done hard scrabble before. And, you know, I don't really care about the material stuff. I'm from Cleveland. I'm used to terrible. So you can't make my life much worse. So let's just keep going.
I'm not orthodox. I'm not dogmatic. I want to always be able to rethink. You know, it was, I think it was Jung who once said, I'm glad I'm young. I'm not a Jungian because I can still change my mind.
I think it's something that you need to do, and it's part of being a grown-up. So maybe that's what this whole process was. It's a growing up, and it's a coming to the realization that this is your watch.
All this race pride stuff, I think it's stupid. So, we didn't choose to be who we are. We are who we are, and I'm glad God made me who I am, because now I know why I'm here. I know what I need to do in life. And I'm a very fortunate human being because I know who I am. I know what my role is.
If the great political thinkers and the great activists of history had become depressed simply because their cause appeared to be hopeless at a given time, then no progress would have been made throughout human history. So
tyranny like hell is not easily conquered.
Exactly.
I fight for this country because I know that despite my experience as a black man in this country, it's the only country I got.
I'm a kind of a go down swinging kind of guy, and so I like to think that I'm not the only one who gets it. I know that there's a whole bunch of people who get it, and I think there's a whole bunch of people who are ready to fight to the end, because where else are we going to go from here? You know, this is it. This is the last stand right here.
I think that the ideology in the West, perfect, it's the world's greatest shot at fairness.
Well, I'm writing a book that you'll be interested in called Talking to the Tea Party.
Oh, really?
Yeah, sure. Because, people think they disagree when they don't. And,
I hope that my role is one of the roles I can play is to make sure that to try to be a bridge of friendship between the organizations, you know. And people say, well, you're going to open offices and me sit. I'm not opening any offices, you know. Like I do what I do and you do what you do, and I hope I influence you to do better. And I hope I can be a support to you to do better with the skill sets that I have, because that's the only thing that makes sense of what I've been through, is that I use what I've learned and gained to help you.
And what I'd like to suggest is we have a heart and a brain at the same time.
one thing for me?
Sure.
What do you think of this as a phrase? Liberty is the greatest form of social justice.
Considered stolen. Now,